Fire it up. It's just getting ready to live stream the YouTube and
Excellent.
then fire it up. It's just getting ready to live stream the YouTube and then all right, I think we are good to go with our very first experimental breakdown live. We are trying to, and hopefully are successfully streaming on Twitter Spaces as well as YouTube. He said optimistically. We'll see how it goes, and to go from there. We've got a bunch of different things that we're going to try to talk about. So this is going to be a little bit of a different format than I think most people are used to. And in order to help keep this interesting and not just Nate ranting for 45 minutes to an hour, we are very, very grateful to be joined tonight by Sarah Biggs. Sarah Biggs is a PR consultant with the firm Olson and Biggs, but she's also an extremely experienced politico. She is somebody who has worked on both sides of the aisle, from a political spectrum standpoint. And she's also somebody who has seen the insides at the provincial, the municipal, and the federal level. So, Sarah, first of all, thank you so much for being willing to come here and bail me out of just talking by myself.
How are you?
I'm very, very good. Thank you. I got
You're
to
welcome.
figure out the feedback problems. We'll turn that down. Hopefully that does it.
Yes, I'm turning it down right now. If anyone's having issues on hearing me on the Twitter live, please let me know. I will be adjusting my sound. Thanks for inviting me. That's awesome. It's Sunday.
When it comes to some of the issues that we're going to be talking about, you're probably one of my favorite people to chat with, just on a what do you think about what's going on here basis. Yeah. So I'm hard pressed to think of anybody that I think this is going to be as much fun with. So to give a little bit of sense of what's going on here, this is our first attempt at streaming, so please be very patient or what have you with us. But secondary to that, I would be remiss if I didn't plug the fact that we're trying to stream this from Zoom to YouTube. The Twitter Spaces stuff is free, so that's pretty easy. But the Zoom to the YouTube piece, there's a learning curve involved here, and it does cost some money. So this is the one and only time I'm going to say it, because we don't do ads, we don't do sponsors or anything like that, but we do have a Patreon page. So if you want to see this kind of thing going on an ongoing basis, please consider visiting our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, and sign up, because even a small monthly amount, less than a good cup of coffee, helps us to make sure that we're building the things in the way that things are supposed to be built. But the way that tonight is going to go is there's been some major developments in the Alberta political sphere over the last week. To call it a dumpster fire would probably be a bit of an understatement. And so we're going to kind of walk through each of those and give each of them a little bit of the attention that they deserve, because that's probably one of the most important things that we're missing with the fire hose of information that we have when it comes to Alberta politics. It's very, very easy to miss the details and the nuance of some of those things. So we're going to go through a bunch of different things and see what we see. Hopefully down the road, we will have the capacity to be able to add in other people's comments and stuff like that. But this is the very first go, and I don't want to try to do that much. So we're gonna keep it fairly light for tonight. But the first topic, Sarah, that I want to get your thoughts on, I'm gonna call it what I've seen a lot of people calling it, and that's the problems with the liquor cabinet. So for anybody who isn't aware, the last week has been full of I hesitate to call them revelations in particular, because there's a lot of this has been very public domain for quite a bit of time. It's no secret that the Premier of Alberta loves to plug his favorite drinks We've seen photos of the premier drinking on the balcony of the legislature with Jason Nixon. We've seen photos of the premier drinking on the balcony of the Sky Palace. So there's a lot of liquor that happens in the legislature, but things really kind of came to a head over the last week with a lawsuit that went public by an ex-UCP press secretary who is alleging, and I probably have to say that for legal reasons, so I will, but she's alleging that one of the things that she experienced while she was working at the legislature before she was fired was not only harassment, sexual harassment from one of the people who worked there, but also she had very real concerns with the toxic environment, particularly the toxic environment stemming from alcohol, and Devin Dreeshen, who was the Minister of Agriculture.
Yes.
Good. Sarah nodded, so I got that one right. And that became a bit of a conversation because in the lawsuits, what's being alleged is that this particular press secretary had concerns about the amount that then Minister Dreeshen was drinking. And there were stories of him having meetings in his his office with the doors locked, secret passwords to get into the room. And the big thing that came up in the lawsuit was a question as to whether or not when she tries to raise concerns with Minister Dreeshen about the degree to which he was becoming intoxicated while performing his duties, he berated her to the point of tears. She was shortly after that fired, and it's that wrongful dismissal that has resulted in the lawsuit. But this has kicked off a bunch of conversation in the Alberta political realm because there's a lot of people who are really starting to ask questions about how much of a role liquor should play in government. Mr. Kenney has come out and said quite openly that he believes that it's a necessary part of doing business in government, which has some fascinating implications for anybody who's, I don't know, sober, who might want to be part of government. But that's where we are. So Sarah, to start with, did I get any of that wrong so far?
No.
Okay.
It's the week in a nutshell in a 3-minute condensate.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
So to start with, let's kind of start with the high level stuff and work our way down. So to start with your experience on both sides of the aisle, because I don't think that this is necessarily a partisan issue. That's just me assuming, as many people are happy to point out, I've never been elected to government. But how much of a role have you seen, without naming any names or anything like that, but how much of a role have you seen alcohol playing in the day-to-day operations of government?
Never.
Okay. Well, that's good news for all the sober people, I guess.
Like, I'm, full disclosure, I am a sober person. I do not drink because I'm a new mom, and I decided that right now taking care of a kid hangover is the worst thing ever. Let's be honest. So there was a thing back in the day where when there was alcohol involved, it was outside the ledge or outside Parliament Hill. Both sides of the aisle were mingling and talking and were maintaining friendships. So what I would say is that we could notice that 10 years ago or 15 or 17 years ago, both sides of the aisle were talking, or were allowed to talk. We were taking it off of grounds, blowing some steam. Full disclosure, I've never worked at the ledge. I was more on the federal level on that side. But with my experience is that we were taking it out of the grounds. After there's been receptions before, absolutely, there's always receptions out there. But I've never seen it blowing out of proportion to that point.
Okay. Have you, I mean, one of the other questions that's come up is to what degree people who are using alcohol at the work. I mean, Mr. Kenny came out at a press conference today, or not today, a couple of days ago, and he said that he believed that it was, being in politics is a social thing, and as such, you have to be willing to have a few drinks as long as you're doing it responsibly. Do you think that I mean, we put out a tweet today where we talked about the fact that on May Day long weekend, heading into the May Day long weekend 2 years ago, Mr. Kenny and Jason Nixon were sitting on one of the balconies at the legislature celebrating the fact that they were changing the laws towards alcohol consumption in parks. How much of this do you think, and it's purely speculation to be clear, how much of this do you think falls back on the premier for sort of the culture that he's set? Is Dreeshen an isolated thing, or what's your sense?
I can't speak if Dreeshen's an isolated thing or not. Unfortunately, I cannot speak to that because I'm not part of the current UCP crowd. So I don't really have insight on that. I don't know. And that would be the prudent thing for me to say. But politics does not automatically involve alcohol. You are making decisions for the people. You have to follow a certain code of ethics. I could say, let's say if a teacher is really stressed out and there's a lot of things going on, he's having a little drink before work. Well, that's not acceptable. That very employee would be fired. Same thing goes for nurses. Same thing goes for doctors. So I would say we could ask the current cabinet, how accountable are they held? How is accountability important within that cabinet? I know for a fact that some of the ministers out there are extremely responsible. They're taking it seriously. Maybe some a little bit less. But at the end of the day, when you're on the ledge, when you're in the office, it's okay to have a drink at 4 o'clock on Friday. But start locking the doors and having passwords and being like little rascals, no girls allowed. It's getting a little childish. Could we even ask, would it be fair to ask if, and again, this is all pure speculation, and I'm asking an honest question, was it only consumed after work hours? Was there any incidents within the ledge when the house was sitting? Like I think there's more that could come from that than just, oh, he was locking the doors and his staff were guarding it. But again, accountability.
And that really, like, to me, that starts at the top. And that's one of the frustrations that I have, is that rather than the premier come out and straight up say, you know what, this is not acceptable, this is not okay, we should not have people drinking on the job. If people want to go out and have a social meeting with friends on the, I don't know, roof of the Sky Palace or something, that's totally okay. But if we're talking about work hours, the way that he described his, I don't know, policy on alcohol consumption while I work at the ledge seemed to be very, well, as long as you don't get in too much trouble, it's all good. And that raises to me some very real questions about what kind of leadership is going on. Because if you have the person who's ultimately responsible for organizing the government, setting the course for government, and all of that kind of stuff, and this guy is the one who's being like, you know what, as long as you don't screw up too big, it's okay. That not only sends a very alarming message to the people who make up government to me, but I think that there's very real concerns as well in regards to what kind of message does that send to everybody else who's watching it?
Well, here's the thing. We have a premier that is known to be extremely micromanaging his cabinet and his affairs. But again, it seems to be very, very discretionary. Or to what he wants to micromanage and what he does not want to micromanage. It all comes back to when the premier was on vacation. There weren't really any meetings about the COVID situation in Alberta in the books. He said that they were having a phone call every day, like it was said before. It's not in the book, it didn't happen, because everything is in the agenda. Everything needs to be noted down. Then we're facing the lawsuit. Then the Dresian affair comes up. How much is he aware, or how much is he turning a blind eye voluntarily because he does not know? It's like if you say to your kids, okay, just go whatever, do whatever you, just don't get in trouble. I don't want to hear about it. Just go do you. And so be it. So it's really surprising that we're facing those situations where we have an extremely micromanaging premier, or allegedly micromanaging premier, and we're facing all of those issues.
Well, you
It's a
segued into the vacation bit quite nicely there. So I'm gonna follow you down that road, because that's one of the other big issues that came up. There was a story a little while ago, as you referred to, where CTV did a FOIP of the premier's calendar while he was away on vacation, which was more than half of the month of August. And what they found was there were only 2 briefings on his calendar that were marked down. And despite what the spin doctors might say, everything that I've heard, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit as well, but everything that I've heard is that any movement that the premier makes in regards to conducting any kind of official business has to be documented. And the only thing that were on his calendar were the 2 rough briefings that were, it seemed to be quite non-specific. So I guess my first question is, have you ever seen an example where a politician goes away for half of a month and says, well, I had all of these meetings, but there's no record of those meetings that he can produce?
No. So usually when someone goes on vacation, there's a line of command. There's number 1, there's number 2, there's number 3, there's number 4. If number 1 goes on vacation, number 2 is in charge. If number 1 and 2 goes on vacation, minister number 3 becomes in charge. And it seems like we are not able to find any paper trace of that delegation of duties has been happening. So we're at the point now where, could it be a problem with record keeping? Could it be B, it was not taking that seriously because he honestly thought it was over? Or C, there was only those 2 meetings. So usually when you see, let's say you see personal time, then you see phone call with Prime Minister of Algeria or President of France, and everything is noted and everything is itemized. So it could bring 2 questions. It's either it didn't happen or there's issues in the office on the record keeping.
And neither of those are particularly comforting given the track record that we've seen with this government and keeping track of accurate information.
Yes.
So that, how much of the spin that we're seeing from a PR perspective, how much of the spin that we're seeing from Mr. Kenney in regards to his vacation, in regards to I was only invited to one of the parties. I can't speak to what happened above and beyond that. And I mean, he, at one point earlier in the week, he claimed that he wasn't aware that the premier's office was being sued, which strains credibility for me, but I've never been the premier of a province, so I don't know. How much of his spin, where he's trying to minimize all of these things, do you think has to do with that's actually how business is done? And how much of it is him going, oh, I'm starting to have some very real problems here, and I have to make them look as small as possible because they're really, really big?
There's 2 possibilities. It could be, oh, look, a squirrel. And, oops, it happened. Or so there could be a few possibilities. And again, I've never been chief of staff. But you would figure that his chief of staff would have addressed the lawsuit. Maybe they decided not to address it to him because Mr. Kenny is not mentioned in that lawsuit. They decided to keep a tight lid on it. Maybe so Mr. Kenny can focus on other issues like COVID.
That'd be great if you started doing that.
We don't know what happens behind those doors. We just don't know. We can only speculate. But someone somewhere did drop the ball. When there's lawsuits, when issues are coming with your staff, if we are looking at the federal level, we have seen in previous years some ministers that had to go reach out for treatment for alcohol or anything and the like. And the premier's office was always aware of those issues. The prime minister's office, my bad, sorry. So at some point, it's asking how tight of a lid is the chief of staff is keeping on the issues happening at the ledge, or how much or very little does Mr. Kenny wants to know?
And given his history is like that's one of the areas where I struggle, because as you said earlier, Mr. Kenny has a reputation, whether or not it's accurate, but he certainly has a reputation for being an extreme micromanager. So for a situation to develop at the legislature where the government is being sued by a previous press secretary with allegations of sexual harassment, especially given a lot of the conversations that are going on across the province with that issue, with all of that going on, for nobody to think, oh, you know what? Maybe we should give the premier a heads up on this little situation instead of letting him get surprised in the middle of a press conference. That's where I have a really hard time going, well, that sounds legit, because even if he has a fraction of the capacity for micromanagement that he is known for him to simply not be aware of something as potentially high profile as it has become, I just can't wrap my head around that.
But we could refer it to the incident with one of Mr. Nixon's employee when she came forward. It's all a matter of culture. How could I say? So I would say that the fact that we are having a man as the Minister of Women and an associate minister that is extremely silent. Please let me speculate that I don't believe that there's much to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace.
Well, and that gets to part of the bigger conversation on, I think, both the issues of the liquor cabinet, but as well as the vacation stuff and how Mr. Kenny reacts to those. We're having a very big conversation in Alberta, certainly Calgary, about not only specific instances. I mean, I worry a little bit that we're focusing too much on specific instances as opposed to the greater culture piece. But I think that we're getting to a bit of a tipping point where we need to start having a much more effective conversation around the idea that we have systemic problems going on here. We have systemic culture problems going on here. We have systemic HR problems going on here at multiple levels of government. And those need to be addressed. How do you have, like, I'm curious, how do we have that conversation more and focus less on the specific one-off instance? Because I feel like with Dreeshen, for example, people go, oh yeah, he's a bad guy, he shouldn't be the minister, and then he goes, okay, well, I'm going to tap out for a little bit, and then everybody goes, oh, okay.
Yeah, so I believe that more and more women are involved in politics now. And there's also a shift of culture. What was considered normal 17 years ago could be a potential lawsuit today. So we need to put that in complex as well. The jokes, a little bit of touching, or the innuendos, or culture has changed. And also, so women my age, let's say in the 25 to 40 demographics right now, is more and more and more and more present within political instances. We are passionate. We are making our way. We are trying to break this ceiling glass. But again, the industry, in quotes, is not adapted to our needs. Because what happened with the I'm going to talk to my secretary this way mentality is not valid in 2021 anymore. We have brains, we are smart, we are educated, and quite often we get the job done a little better than some of them out there. So we really need, like, I strongly believe that maybe there should be a non-partisan HR committee that sets up guidelines and a code of ethics and a code of conduct in order to address those systemic issues. Because every day we're going to hear some bad jokes. Every day we're going to be hearing comments. And every day we're going to be like, well, I'm feeling a little bit, there's nothing like feeling a little bit harassed, but there's sometimes the comment, well, that went across the line. When do we need to take it from there? And they do not take it seriously, because I'm sorry, but Miss Isaac should have come out and said, you know, we should be addressing that. And this should be addressed, and we need to take care of it. So again, it's all a matter of culture and how we will approach it. And I would even say, let the women lead the charge and lead those committees and ethics regulation revisions and whatnot. Let the women lead. Let them know how and how they will be comfortable in that work environment, because it's an extremely hard work environment and it's very throat cutting. It's cutthroat. There's no second.
One of the things that struck me is I think there's certainly some parallels that can be drawn between, I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is abuse of authority. And to me, there's some parallels that can be drawn between the conversation that we're having in regards to how governments and people in power behave, and as well, some of the conversations that we're having right now about policing. And one of the things that I keep hearing in regards to the conversation about policing is that there needs to be more. Can't help but wonder when it comes to not necessarily policy stuff, because there's so much that I don't like about the UCP's policies. They did get elected, but how they conduct themselves in business when they're representing Albertans and when they're representing the province, I'm starting to wonder if maybe there's a worthwhile conversation on I don't know, can I call it company time?
Yes.
There we go then. Okay.
You're always on someone's time. Our taxes are paying them. They are on our time. Everybody is always on someone's time. 24/7. So it's such that those events that happened in the past few weeks, and it could happen in any party. And I'm not just targeting the UCP right now. This could happen anywhere. But we need to have some measures in place that will make politics attainable and feasible for women. And I think that's a very important conversation that we need to have as a province. Some companies are very big in culture. So many classes about sexual harassment. I know Parliament Hill has classes. Rona Ambrose introduced a bill so the judges could get some classes and try to understand and sensibilization about understanding victims of sexual assault. If we all remember one of those judges that said, well, maybe she should have kept her knees closed. Well, I think we need to say, but it's not always why is it always our fault?
Yeah.
Why is it not, why is the man workforce in certain work environments are not recognized as, as responsible as us women are?
I would be happy to argue as a man that especially when you're dealing with issues of um, power dynamics and where people do have authority, or whether it's real or perceived, over other people, there's a responsibility to make sure uh, that the conduct with the person who has the power is of a higher level than of anyone else in the room. I think the more power that you have, the more, I don't want to get all Spider-Man, but I think the more power that you have, the more responsibility that you have. And when we're talking about the issues of setting tone and all of that, that's where I think it's really important that it's made clear that from the leadership level, that there are certain things that simply won't be tolerated. But speaking of leadership, I'm going to use that as an opportunity to seg into our next topic. Mr. Brian Jean apparently couldn't find a home in the Alberta Party, so he's coming back to the UCP. He announced this week that it was a very strange announcement, because on the first day he said, hey, you know what, Fort Mac, I'm thinking about running for you. Let me know what you think. I want to get your feedback. I want your consultation. And I think it was less than 48 hours later that he was like, you know what, I'm going to do it. And this creates a very interesting dynamic, because in order for Mr. Jean to run for the UCP, he's got to get the approval of the nomination from the leader of the UCP, who is Jason Kenney. And they have I'll call it a fraught relationship, because Mr. Brian Jean has been calling out Jason Kenney for months and has been saying that Jason Kenney needs to go as leadership. And he's also, in his campaign, straight up said that he's running to help get rid of Jason Kenney. So there's this fascinating, I can't think of an example where I've ever seen anyone say before, you know what, I'm going to run for office to get rid of the guy whose permission I need to run for office. Have you ever, let's start with it. Have you ever seen anything as messed up as this before?
There's been some weird stuff happening in Quebec back in the 90s, back in the early 2000s, where, they were, let's say when Jean Charest started going down in popularity, there was some work backstage being done, and to try to, create a push or a coup d'etat or whatever you would like to call it, and try to initiate that political change. But someone came out flat out and be like, hey, I'm here to take his job. Hey, boss, can you please sign me off? It's a little odd. The Strategist did a full episode on that last week. But so Kenney has two choices. And stemming from those choices, there's so many responsibilities. And I'm going to repeat a little bit of what Stephen Carter said, because we all come to the same conclusions, really, is that it's either Kenney refuses to sign his papers. So what could happen is that Jean could win the by-election, sits in the opposition as an independent, and then could we see some floor crossing? Maybe, maybe not. But then that could potentially bring the fracture of the UCP. That's number one. Number two, keep your enemies closer. So Mr. Kenney signs Mr. Jean's nomination papers, and he makes sure that he's on a tight leash and gets him to answer extremely hard questions out there, and showing that Mr. Jean maybe is not the right leader for the UCP. Mr. Jean has his strength, but Mr. Jean has his weaknesses as well. He's extremely popular, but he's an effective politician on the social point, but on the policy point, it's a little weak. So I think we could see two scenarios here. It's either, and also what is going to happen in 2 weeks at the convention. That's not a Pandora box that we're going to be opening then. It's going to be interesting to see what will be happening. But I really wish I could have a crystal ball and tell you exactly what's going to happen in the next few months. The leadership review needs to be completed before March 1st. Ideally, that's what they're going for if they have the constituency associations they need. So from there, what do? Do you let your party die, or you try to save it? Because let's not forget that the UCP is Jason Kenney's party. He was the one that was able to bring the progressive right and the far right together as one. So what is it going to happen? Because Mr. Kenney was Wild Rose, he's going to be he's going to be attracting more of the Drew Barnes and the Jason Nixon and, you know, everybody around those. But then what happens to the Doug Schweitzer, to the Tyler Shandros, to the Whitney I6, to anybody that we could see as a little bit more reasonable out there? What could happen? We just don't know.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, because and we chatted about this before you agreed to come do this silliness. But there are some very real implications for Brian Jean getting elected, whether it's as a UCP candidate who is endorsed by Mr. Kenney, who gets into the legislature on the platform of getting rid of Mr. Kenney. That has its own complications, way too many to calculate. But the other piece of it that's really interesting to me is Mr. Jean has been clearly looking for a way back into provincial politics for quite some time. We've received multiple, I mean, there's been nothing said publicly that I've been able to find, but we've received multiple off the record confirmations that he was indeed sniffing around the Alberta Party. He was indeed considering running for their leadership. He didn't. The reasons for that seem to be that the Alberta Party said, you know, that's not really our brand. So, and they don't really have a brand. So for them to say that is really quite telling. And so then he had to find another mechanism, but he did a whole thing, a thought piece, I guess you could call it, a little while ago, where he talked about how Alberta needs a new type of political party. Political parties in Alberta are historically a huge pain to get started, because you have to have either a certain number of candidates run in the election, you have to have a certain number of signatures collected, but there's a third option. And that's where things, I think, potentially get really, really interesting, because as per the Elections Alberta website, the quickest and easiest way to start a new political party in Alberta is to have 3 seats in the legislature. And I find it extremely hard to believe that if Brian Jean ran either as a member of the UCP or as an independent conservative, that he would not have, I can't see him having any problems finding 2 other people out of 87 to say, you know what? Yeah, let's go start this new Wild Rose, but the original flavor, not the clear stuff.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So how many independent MLAs do we have right now in the ledge?
There's at least 2.
You know, in the United States, to start a bank, you need $5 and a shingle. In Alberta, you need 3 candidates. So there's so much speculation we could do, and we could talk about it for hours like we do offline. I just do not know that Mr. Jean. So
let
if
me
he
let me come
does,
at it this way. Let me come at it this way. You're a PR professional. You've
yeah,
got a PR firm. Let's start with, if you were advising Mr. Kenny what to do in this situation, he's come to you and said, Sarah, boy, I've got myself into a pickle here. What do I do about Brian Jean? What do you think? What do you tell him?
well, first put your house in order. That's number one. Put your house in order and make sure you're surrounded by your closest allies, and you go. Second, sign his nom's paper, let him run, and bring in, keeping, it's like my 1-year-old I'm keeping right next to me. And I'm keeping, because my child climbs everywhere and she's just gonna start screaming and hurling things. That's how I would, it's a silly way to put it, but it's like almost not infantilizing Mr. Jean, but keeping him so close and such on a short leash that he won't be able to damage you too much. That's personally what I would recommend him to do. But again, if the whole, but I don't know the exact situation in caucus right now. I do not know what the atmosphere is during the meeting. So let's say if he's able to really clean up his house, rally up his ministers and be like, okay, let's do this, let's get things done, let's bring Jean in. But if Mr. Kenny does not have his house in order, then bringing Mr. Jean could cause a lot of issues because he angered both sides of the spectrum at this point.
So here's the flip side of the coin.
Yeah.
If Mr. Jean came to you and said, Sarah, I can't deal with Kenny anymore. He's wrecking the conservative brand. He's going to let the NDP get a huge majority, an untouchable majority in the next election because everybody hates him so much.
Yeah.
What's the best way for me to proceed? What do you tell Brian Jean?
Let him burn.
Well, so does Brian Jean go for the leadership? Does he use the power of 3, or what does he do?
So the way I see it is that if they are trying to do anything viable, so we all know, and even Mr. Jean predicted it, that the next government most likely will be NDP because the NDP is the new mainstream party in Alberta. Now, if the UCP is getting just wiped across the board, like it is showing right now when you're looking at 338, the numbers are not looking good. And maybe you would need a rebrand here. Maybe you need to do a little something and try to attract both sides of the right side of the moon. But how do you do it? You need a rebrand because the UCP name is going to be gone. It's going to be done. It's Jason Kenney's party. If Mr. Kenney loses his seat, the UCP is gone. Who will take over? The rebrand behind that, the rebrand strategy would be huge. So again, we could see a split because not everybody will go for Brian Jean. Even the ones that are sitting as UCP MLAs and ministers right now. So that's a tough question to answer. Just let it burn. You're not going in next time. Build your brand. Try to sound smart. Build your brand, build your team, and try to come back in 6 years.
Okay. The last topic that I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight was what's that?
LaSalle, the omnibus bill.
Yes, the omnibus. Well, it seems to be the way that Mr. Kenney likes to legislate, where he will put in a bill and call it something incredibly broad, and then he sandwiches in like, I don't know, 100 different things that are otherwise unrelated. And it pushes through a bunch of different topics without allowing for a whole lot of robust conversation. I mean, right now he's got the seats in the legislature where he doesn't really have to allow for a whole lot of robust conversation.
Yeah.
And we've certainly see him utilize parliamentary games to make sure that there isn't a whole lot of robust conversation. But what's your take on the omnibus bill? And I mean, my personal thing before I hand it back to you,
Yeah.
I am fascinated, given the scandals that we've seen over the last week and a half, that they would introduce a bill that has so many loosening of restrictions regarding alcohol. Like it's hey, we've been caught doing this really bad thing, so we're going to introduce a bill that basically says, it's cool though. The tone and the message that it sends is really quite staggering to me. But what's your take on not only the strategy of using an omnibus bill, but what are the biggest things that you think people should be looking at with Bill 80?
Bill 80 is 88 pages long.
So it's a lot of read.
So usually omnibus bills are when you have lots of legislation that you have a lot of work to do, but it's simple enough, meaningful changes. The House leaders from both sides of the aisle sit together because the House leader of the governing party invites, in good faith, the House leader of the opposition. So we're talking about 10 years ago. Now, matters are kind of lost now and it's not happening anymore. What should have happened is that with the COVID fiasco, they should have gone to the NDP, the House leader in the NDP, and be like, hey, you know what? Come and talk with us a little bit to see what we should get done together. But no, they took the higher road again, and they're planning on ramming Bill 80 down our throats. Really, that's what the plan is. And there won't be much debate about it. So, but they're trying to pretend that they want to reduce red tape, but it doesn't really. And that's the issue. They're trying to discuss about health premiums, but we haven't paid health premiums in 10 years. The doctor's contract kind of puts everything on, kind of wishy-washy situation right now.
So they're making changes to cannabis.
The changes to cannabis. So the AGLC would be assuming a loss of $200,000 a year for not managing, for not being the sole vendor supplier of online cannabis. And then Minister Toews even said that they will allow people to sell bongs and such online to kind of try to increase the sale as well. So they're able to ship that to make it more appealing to the crowd, and then create entertainment district that's going to look like New Orleans and it's going to be Stampede year round. Is it interesting? Is it a meaningful omnibus bill? No, it is not. Is it horrible? It's not the worst we've seen, but conservatives are extremely well known for their omnibus bills when they're just trying to create distraction from one very specific issue, which is the curriculum is a big one right now. And the curriculum is a very good barometer on Mr. Kenney's popularity as well. So could it be seen as arrogant? Yes. Is it red tape reduction? Is it a red tape reduction omnibus bill? No. Is it a big fat squirrel out there and is trying to distract of everything that's happening out there? Maybe. And that's where my issue is with the omnibus bill, because we have give the doctors a proper contract. Stop fighting with your doctors that's been out there for 18 months. Stop fighting with your medical staff. Let's really focus on the real issues here. And let's not worry about booze consumption at 3:00 in the afternoon downtown Calgary on Stephen Avenue. It's extremely peculiar, and to me, it seems a little petty. Because omnibus bills can be good, but omnibus bills can be extremely bad as well.
It feels like to me there's a little bit of bread and circuses at play here. So we had the circus with the Stampede. Everybody got to have their best summer ever, as long as you ignore the body count. And now it's maybe time for a little bit of bread. So we're gonna let you have we're gonna make it easier to drink a little bit. We're gonna make it easier to get your weed a little bit. And that's what the plan is. The funny thing about bread and circuses, though, is that it only feeds one specific appetite, to my understanding. And if people get used to, well, they're just going to keep loosening the rules and loosening the rules and loosening the rules, then when you get to a place where you can't loosen the rules anymore, or you have to increase restrictions like we saw with provincial parks, where Mr. Nixon had to come out and say, look, guys, we have to increase enforcement because y'all are getting way too drunk in the parks on the weekends.
But we're the province of personal responsibility. Right? Our whole COVID strategy has been based on personal responsibility, being like, you guys, you shouldn't really hang out together Thanksgiving, but we trust you. When how many families out there broke the rules? It is concerning at some point, because also, and we got to talk about a public safety issues side as well, with the increasing of alcohol consumption in public spaces can lead to more sexual assault, sexual harassment, fights, incidents involving police and EMS, drug overdoses. Well, this is so much more than just having a beer on Stephen Avenue at 3:00 on a Sunday. This is so much more than that. We are not, again, addressing feminine, trans, LGBTQ2S+. We are putting, again, the minority at risk in the sake of cutting red tape and personal responsibility.
Yeah.
This to me is very distressing, seeing that. And, I really hope that if this, it will go through because, majority. I really hope that the cities, again, the responsibility will be downloaded on the municipalities to keep those districts safe for everyone. And that is a big concern. And it is increased cost to the tax base. So I'm very curious to see how at a municipal level that will be handled as well, especially, let's say, with the city of Calgary, where they're saying they're not cutting in police funding, but they cut 30 million for this year. So really, it's going to be interesting to see what is happening. I think we need to keep an eye open on that, because again, they're seeing the big picture, but they forgot the details. But again, with the UCP, everything is in the small details. Everything is in the small lines. With a policy, we're going to do this, but, and then something else comes out. There's always a caveat to every single thing that comes out. So is downloading that responsibility to an overloaded police system, an overloaded, non-efficient 911 centralized system, EMS, and everything else, is it fair? I don't think so. But again, what do we know?
I think the one thing that we do know is that there's definitely some folks that stand to make a boatload of money. And I think that my personal bet would be that's where Mr. Kenney's priorities are focused on, because I don't think that he has not, to me, demonstrated any awareness or concern for social cost. Just before, we said we were going to go for a half hour, 45 minutes, and it's been almost an hour. So I don't want to keep you away from your toddler for too much longer, but I do want to just ask for one prediction.
Yes.
Does Jason Kenney sign Brian Jean's nomination papers, or doesn't he?
Hold on. I have a coin here. Let's flip it. Ready?
Ready. Okay, you got to call it. Heads is he signs them, tails is he doesn't.
Heads.
Heads. We signs them. Okay. Well, that's very scientific and based on data entirely.
We don't
So-
have any data except JC's Kenny's brain, which is not accessible right now.
That's true. Sarah, thank you so much for taking this time
Thank
to do
you.
the first live stream of the breakdown. This is going to be a fascinating ongoing experiment, but I really appreciate your time and your perspectives. Thank
I'll
you so
talk
much.
to you soon. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Bye.